Okay, welcome everyone to my talk, Enforcing Formatting Rules on Commit, on Git commit to be exactly. My name is Philipp Salvisberg. I'm a senior principal consultant at Trivadis, and I spent some times lately to provide formatting rules for SQL developer, which comply to our Trivadis guidelines. And at a certain point in time, I thought it would be interesting to do that automatically as well, because the formatter is quite okay from my point of view to try that out. So this, what I present here are the results. And I've actually enabled that automatic formatting feature into Git repos. So it should work, and I hope you will try that out afterwards. So let's start with the formatter and what it does, and especially what it does in SQL Developer. So here's an example of a not formatted code in a SQL Developer editor. And when you press Control F7 in SQL Developer and you have the default settings enabled, so a plain vanilla installation of SQL Developer with default settings, then the formatting result will look like this. So the keywords are in uppercase, you have an indentation of four characters here. This is how it looks like. And if you are going to import the Trivadis settings, which are available on GitHub for free, and then press Control F7, then the default result will look like this. So you see the keywords are in lowercase, there are right aligned keywords in the select statement, stuff like that. And maybe you know the Trivadis guidelines and say, hey, in the Trivadis guidelines, you recommend to use leading commas, but here are trailing commas used. Well, that's something I like, and I don't like leading commas. And there we go in the discussion regarding formatter settings. Getting an agreement when more than one person is involved, it's quite challenging. And of course, from my point of view, you should first of all agree per project what the guidelines are and how you format your code. And if you have an agreement, then you are potentially ready to automatically format your code, not earlier. And of course, if you don't like it, you can change the settings and say, I'd like to have leading commas, maybe with a space or without the space after a comma. You can configure that as well, and then the result looks like this. This brings me to the configuration, to the formatter settings, and the formatter settings in SQL Developer are basically two things. You have so-called advanced format settings, where you can configure where you want to have leading or trailing commas and the indentation, the line size, stuff like that, stuff you see here on the left side. And compared to other tools, this is quite minimal what you can configure here. But you have also these custom format settings, which allows you to basically override the formatter logic of what the SQL Developer team provides. It gives you access to the parse tree, and you basically can do whatever you like to get the result there. It's not that simple to do that, but you can do that. And that's a great thing. And that's the base of our formatting rules we provide. We have completely rewritten that part to produce the result we like. So you get this formatting settings here on that link. By the way, you find me on my blog the latest slides of this talk as well. So you can export these settings, and for the advanced format, you get an XML file, and for the custom format, you get an arbory file. Arbory is that language which is used here, which enables you to query the Oracle parse tree and do the formatting stuff. That's a separate talk about Arbory. I won't go into details here in this talk. So when you have exported that settings, you can, of course, give them to other SQL developer users and say import them and use them there. But you can also use these settings within SQL CL, the alternative for SQL Plus. And in SQL CL, you have a format command. And this format command allows you to format the file. You give an input file, an output file. And in fact, input and output can be the same, and the file is overwritten. You can also pass here a directory name, and the directory name is walked through recursively, and every file is formatted. Every file, yes, really every file. SQL developer, SQL CL in this case, just opens every file, try to parse it. If there is a parse error, then it skips that file. And if it can parse it, then it's most probably SQL or PL SQL or SQL Plus script, and then it will format it. You can also import formatter rules. This file name here allows you to load these preferences. Unfortunately, you can only load this. Hi, Pete. You can only format this import rules based on the XML preferences. It's not possible to import the Arbory file, unfortunately, until now. This is one of the reasons we came up with our own JavaScript file for SQL CL, which allows us to import, to define the XML for the formatter and the Arbory file for the formatter, and which also allows to format markdown files. So you find these 3 backticks and then SQL, and then it identifies these sections and will format these SQL and PL SQL and SQL Plus parts in the markdown file as well. So these are the features, and it's just an alternative for the standard format command in SQL CL. We will use that. So one question is, can a formatter break my code? So usually you would say, no, that's not possible, but unfortunately there are some cases you should be aware of. So one case is that SQL was initially case insensitive, but this changed, and this changed since version 12.2, where the JSON dot notation was introduced, and you can do stuff like that. Here's a simple example. I query from a table T, column C is a JSON column, and I get access to the account number here. That's the JSON object here I have, and then I can access the account number here, or the account number or account type here in the where clause. When I press Ctrl F7, I will produce a result. Maybe when I say to convert identifiers to lowercase, then I will convert this uppercase number here to lowercase and the type as well. This statement still works, but it does not produce the same result. In this case, it just gets a null value because account type written this way does not exist in this column. So null equals A will never be true. So you don't get any results here. And even if I get result here, the account number won't be found here. The result will be null here. So that's something you must be aware of. And that's why our default settings are identifiers case keep unchanged because of that. If you're sure that you don't use this kind of code here, and you must be aware that Oracle types are also affected when you use them in combination with JSON. If you are sure that you don't use this kind of stuff here, then you can change it here to lowercase or uppercase if you like. Otherwise, it might break your code. There's other case, unfortunately. We found out that there is a wrong white space handling. And the reason is that the parser, which is included in SQL Development, SQL CL, the same one, does not identify the add command end properly. It thinks the add command ends with this set. It thinks it belongs also to this set command. And as a result, because we said we would like to start every command on a new fresh line, there was a new line added here when we do the formatting stuff. And the result is that this set define off does not work anymore. So it's breaking the code. So the solution is to use SQL Def or SQL CL 21.4 or newer. And you say, what, 21.4? It's not available yet. Yes, you're right, it's not available yet, but it is fixed in that release. So be aware of that stuff here. And there is also the possibility that the formatter in SQL Developer and SQL CL can replace white spaces with something else. In fact, our formatter had a bug some versions ago where we had on the certain constellations on the windows, we returned undefined instead of no white space. And the result was something like that. And this of course breaks your code as well. So you should use our latest settings. And of course, you should use it only from trusted sources, because something like this, that can also change your code in something which works, but does not that what it did originally. So be aware of that too. This is fixed. Our current setting has a fail-safe at the end, and even if something happens like that, it will be fixed and you get a warning in your logs. So this is really something which is a non-issue for our new settings. So, but it's important to know that. So let's look at the Git hooks, what we have. And when I started with Git, I would be happy if someone could have shown me this picture, because it explains really quite well how Git works. You have on the upper side here, you have the remote repository, and on the lower side, you have that what is installed in your local PC, your local repository. You have the index, it is the staging area stuff you would like to be committed next. And you have your work area here, where all the files are stored which you are working on. And then is an area here, the stash area, when you can push stuff which you would like to save here before you do the commit, and maybe change your branch, and so on and so forth. You see the most commands here. And what you see also here is that only a few commands are able to talk to the remote repository. Typically, when you have already cloned your repository, these are fetches and pulls and the push. And on the remote side, there are hooks where you can add some scripts to check, for example, that the message confirms your definitions. And if it doesn't confirm your definitions, you can abort it. And you have also the possibility, for example, after a post receive, you can start some CI integration script, something like that. But usually you don't have access on for these hooks, because you are not the administrator of the remote site. And for public repos like GitHub, it's simply not available for you. So these are theoretical hooks which could be used, but you cannot really use. But you have the full access on local hooks, and local hooks are stored in a hidden directory like this local repository, like this index, and like this stash. It's stored in the .git directory hooks, and there are some examples, and there are also a lot of hooks here. We will look at the commit hooks in detail. But before I show you that, I will show you another cheat sheet, which I like also quite well, because I think it's really a good one. It shows you all these areas you have, the work area, the remote repository, the local repository, the index, which is another name for the staging area or staging, and another name is also cache. And you can click on one of these areas and you see which statements are available. And it's a really nice interactive cheat sheet. So let's look at the commit workflow. The commit workflow has four hooks, 3 hooks before the commit and 1 afterwards. The first one, which is executed exactly in this order, is the pre-commit hook. There you can do checks whether the rules have applied are okay for some code checking, some linting. You can do that, and this hook is also suited to do formatter changes. So you can use that. We will look at that one. But it's also interesting or important to know that there are other hooks here, and these hooks are especially for changing the commit message. One of these hooks does it before you get a pop-up window, typically when you forget to enter a commit message, and this one is processed afterwards, so you can still check it and abort the commit, or you can fix that message. And then everything is committed. And then afterwards, you have the ability to do something else, but this hook is not really suited to amend the commit. So what's also important to notice is that the pre-commit hook does not get any parameter. So if you want to find out what to do, you have to ask, hey, what's the difference from what is in the staging area and so on. So no parameters, you have to find it out based on the environment, what to do. So a next question is, can the execution of the pre-commit hook be enforced? And the answer is no, it cannot. So it's you're on your local laptop, and there is no feature of Git which automatically populates this hook. So a Git clone and the Git pull will not populate these hooks. This will populate it by another procedure. By default, there are only stored there some examples, but you have to copy the hook yourself into this directory and make it executable. So this is a security measure. It makes sure that nothing vulnerable will be executed. So that's important to know. But even if you have some processes with automatic deployment and so on, which stores your Git hooks there, you can still bypass these hooks by, for example, calling git commit no verify. So a commit will be executed without any hooks. That's always possible. So therefore it cannot be enforced. But if you have agreed formatting rules, then it helps you to automatically do stuff. So it helps, but it cannot be really enforced. Another topic when we talk about hooks is the compatibility. So the question is probably, where does it run? On which OS does it run? We talk about scripts here, and we talk about typically shell scripts here. And Git is designed originally for Git, but Git is designed originally for Linux, but it works also on all Unix derivatives like Apple. And it also works on Windows using Git bash. So your Git installation comes with Git bash. There is no Git installation without it on Windows, no distribution without it on Windows. And there you get the stripped down version of a Linux system where you can execute scripts. So scripting, shell scripting works also on Windows. So the next question is, does it work in all tools where I use Git? So of course it works for the command line, but does it work also in other GUI tools for Git, like SourceTree and in other IDEs? And the question is really depends. It depends on mainly whether these tools are using the command line interface behind the scene or not. When they are using the command line interface, then they are fully compatible. If they are not using the command line interface, like for example, Eclipse or SQL Developer, they use JGit both, and Eclipse has wrapped that in Egypt for some GUI stuff there. Then it depends on the version you are using of JGit, and in Eclipse it works. There is some problems with the console output of the Git commands, but technically it works. It's just a hassle to debug it when it does not produce the result you expected. But it does not work in SQL Developer because SQL Developer uses a very old version of JGit where the pre-commit hook was not supported. And just to give you an idea, the support was implemented in version J 3.7 in 2015. So it's really a quite old bundle SQL Developer uses, and it behaves like you do a git commit with a no verify parameter. Good. So let's start with a naive pre-commit hook. I said naive pre-commit hook. It's the first steps in pre-commit hook. It's a simplified pre-commit hook. In fact, something like this I used when I started writing my first pre-commit hook. It has a lot of flaws, which I will talk about a bit later, but it's simple. It shows that in principle, writing a git commit pre-commit hook is simple. So what I do as a first step is in my target repository, I'd like to create the explicit directory containing all formatter settings. I called it in my repo formatter, and there I downloaded this format.js file, and I downloaded also the formatter settings, the XML and the Arbory file, which are used also in SQL Developer. So these are basically my settings, and I added to the Git repo this formatter directory or the file contained there, and then I committed it. And the next step would be to amend this setting to fit your needs. So probably you will change some settings here in the XML file and do a further commit, and then you are ready from the settings perspective. And then the next thing is to create the Git hooks pre-commit file. So, and the simple one that really fits on the slide is we have to do three things. We have to identify the staged files. We have to format these files, and then we have to update the staging area. That's it. These are the functions called here, and then I exit with 0. Exit with 0 means that we do not abort the commit process. A non-zero value will lead to abort of the commit process. So let's look at this function here, which are empty implementations in the next slide. So here's a variant to implement to get the staged files. So I do that with a git diff command. The cached file, this is an alternative name for the index. And I compare it with the head. The head is the last commit I've made here on that branch. And I'm not really interested in the diffs. I'm just interested in the names. And I'm also just interested on some files in the staging area, the files which are added or modified. I'm not interested in deleted ones. I don't want to format deleted files. It's probably also difficult to do that, but I'm also not interested in renames. So this is a simple line to get the staged files. And then the next thing to do is to format these files in the workspace. And here I do just a simple loop around the staged files and call SQL Developer for each file I found. I know it's not really intelligent to do that because It takes a second or 1.5 seconds to start SQL.cl, so it's not the fastest method to do, but it is an easy way to start with this. So I call the script here. I have stored in the formatter file with my settings, and then these files are formatted. And the last thing I need to do is to update my staging area. After I finished with my formatting, some of the files might change. They changed only if the formatter changed the white spaces, but some of them might change. And to be sure, I just add every file which was in the staging area. I add them again to the staging area, and then make sure these changes by the formatter are also considered. Okay, so they will be committed in one step. I know it's not very nice to have a commit operation which does change my content before I commit it, but that's the best way I came up with to include the formatter call. So let's look at this naive pre-commit hook, how this works and what the flaws are, the first flaws. So I go to the demo. I've prepared here a repository. I migrated, I created a separate branch. And here you see I have the formatter directory as shown on the slides. This is the Arbory file. This is the XML file with the settings I used. And I also stored here the SQL.cl JavaScript file. Okay, these are my settings. And in the Git directory, this is usually hidden. I changed the settings in my Visual Studio Code to make that visible. I find here the hooks, and here I copied the pre-commit hook, which just uses a few lines of code to do that stuff I showed here before in the slide. So this repository is ready to process automatically format files I'm going to commit. So the next thing I do, I open a terminal window here below, and I do create the file, let's call it test SQL, and do something like select star from dual where dummy is not null semicolon. Every token on a single line. And it appears here. So this is the file I expect to be committed. I do that here in the first demo, mostly everything on the command line. Afterwards, I will show it in the ID directly. So what I can do right now is a git add star, git add git commit with a message add test SQL, something like that. And then behind the scenes, automatically the pre-commit hook will be called. It takes some time to start SQL.cl. This file is formatted, and you see it is shown here. And when I look here at the commit history, I will see here that this file was added there. So my original unformatted file is not visible anymore. So that's how it works. So let's do a copy of this file, cp test.sql to test2. And let's repeat that once more and even once more. So we have 3 additional files. And let's add them. Git add star, and let's commit them as well. Git commit -m add copies, something like that. Huh? So behind the scene again, the git commit hook starts, and you see the flaw SQL.cl is started for every single file, which works, but this is a bit slow. Let's do something else. Let's do a change here and say, oh, select star. That's not what I want. I want to select dummy directly. And yes, maybe I should add also an additional query here. Select the emp no cell from emp, where you see I add some white spaces to be formatted later, where depth no equals 20. Something like that. I save that. And then what I can do typically, or what I do when I have something like that, usually I have two areas here. I have a change in that command and I edit something new. And I usually just want to add this line in a separate command, in a separate Git commit. So I want to have one commit here for just this dummy and one commit here for this remaining stuff. You can do that with command line too, but you have to fiddle with the patch there. It's much easier to do that in the UI. So what I can do here right now is just do a git commit -m. And in this case, it's just the select star, which I want to fix. Let's say so no select star. And the file is formatted and everything is committed. So this is really a flaw. I just wanted to do a first commit and not everything, not the complete file. And that's one of the flaws this naive approach have. So let's look at some further flaws this naive approach has. So first of all, we do not do any checks for prerequisites. I do not check if CL executable is available in the path, if the script is available, if Java is available, something like that. And the question is, if I don't find this stuff, what do I do? Do I abort the commit, or do I want to allow the commit to complete? And from my point of view, we should allow the commit to complete and fix this stuff later that it really works. So in this case, if it's not available, we will throw probably a warning and exit with a 0 status. And there is another flaw that all these operations we do a diff with the index, the standard staging area. But the Git world is a bit more complicated. There are cases where an intermediate staging area is produced based on the command. And one easy example is git commit only, where you have the possibility to choose just a set of files which you want to commit, whatever you have in the staging area. You just give this file and this file, or just one file. And then behind the scenes, an intermediate staging area is produced, and this one is then committed. So it's quite difficult to access this intermediate file because you don't have an API from Git. So it's some internal stuff here, but we can find out whether such a non-standard Git file is used. We have an environment variable which says it's Git index file, and if it's not equal to Git index, usually it's called then something like git index.lock, or with a temporary number in between, something like that. If we have such a non-standard staging area, the only option we can say is we cannot format it, we cannot identify the files correctly because we don't have access to this intermediate staging area. Technically we have it, but this is really a hack. And then these partial commits I showed in the demo, if you have them, so if the staging area is different to my workspace, that's the definition of a partial commit, then I just say, hey, do the partial commit. We do not try to format everything, and then just this partial commit will be committed. And there are also this area of unnecessary commits. Let's consider this simple example. That's what it is committed here. And look at the semicolon. We changed it before the formatter call to a new line, added here a new line. So it's here. And after the formatter call, it will be put back and will look exactly the same like the head. And if we identify such things, then we should remove this file from the staging area. It does not make sense to commit them with no changes. And there's a special case if all of the files are identical and the staging area becomes empty, then we should really abort the commit. It does not make sense to do a commit with no change at all. There are further flaws. Also, the SQL is called multiple times. It's not really nice for other developers to install that stuff. You have to send them the Git hook and say, yeah, install it in that directory and don't forget to set chmod +X and so on. You could set up that process and make it easier. And of course, you can add some additional output for debugging purposes. So, and this brings me to the better pre-commit hook. After some iteration, I've came up with a solution which I think is quite okay. This solution is available on the same GitHub repo where we provide the settings. There we have a hook directory, and there is a README how to install it, and an example, a template you can use for your repositories. I don't want to go into detail here, but I will show you some parts of it in the next demo I've prepared. Oops. So I set up here another clone of a repo. In this repo, I have also a formatter directory. These are the XML files and Arbory files. They are identical, but I added here a pre-commit hook. And this pre-commit hook has some sections here, and the first section here is a configuration. By default, the format JS script is used, but there is also an option to use a standalone formatter. So we provide also in the settings on that GitHub a TVD format jar, which can be used without SQL just to do the formatting stuff. It has some advantages. The main advantages is less dependencies, and it's a bit faster than doing that via SQL. Okay, and then I can configure stuff here, my parameter, and from here on we have subroutines which should not be changed or not intended to. It's not required to be changed. Of course, you can do whatever you want, and in the end we call that stuff here. It's not very interesting to go into detail here. What's more interesting is that I put also here a script which is called install pre-commit hook, and this does basically just copy this pre-commit hook in the repo to the hook directory, makes it executable, and also downloads the latest release of the standalone formatter and puts that also in the Git directory. It's already executed here. I see the TVD format which was downloaded, and I see the same larger Git pre-commit hook. So this repo is also ready now with a much better version of a pre-commit hook. I also prepared this change here where I added this dummy and select from emp here, and I try to do this partial commit again. So I go here again via GUI. It's much nicer. I just want to select to stage this line here, and then I have this dummy and cannot say no select star, and let's look what happens. It's committed. This change is pending, but it did not format the stuff. So is there a way to find out what happened behind the scenes from the IDE? And in this case, Visual Studio Code is quite good in that area. I can open the terminal here, and there is also an output window. Typically, it's the default is the tasks here, and you can switch here to Git, and you see the whole Git outputs. And somewhere I should see here the statement issued by the IDE where it does a commit, and I get a warning bypassing formatter due to partial commit. That's exactly what we wanted. We did not start the formatter, we just passed it unformatted and committed that stuff. But when I do the next thing here, I just add this to the staging area and say add emp query and commit that stuff. See here, behind the scene, the commit will take place. And what happens here, it will format me the whole file, and I get the change, not only the change here, but I get the complete file formatted. So when I look at the commit history here for the add query, I see what it has happened. This is added, but the whole file is formatted first, and so these white spaces have been removed as well. But I think that's quite good. Let's try something else, and let's think. I have now a better Git hook, which I can call directly. And I like to format all files here in this database demo directory. So the database demo. Hooks, I think. Huh? So, and when I type in everything correctly, then I see that it starts to format 13 files. In this case, it's done much more intelligently. You see here the parameters which are used, and I see also here somewhere no, that's okay. And but nothing changed here. So of course, if I want to change something, I probably have to change my settings. And one of the interesting settings to change, I guess, is where I place the comma, after or before. It's after here, and let's change that to before. And then rerun this statement again and see what happens. So again, 13 files will be formatted file by file. This takes some seconds to do that. And then I see here in my window, I have 10 changes. Obviously, 9 files have been formatted. I can see that also here in, 9 files have been changed through that. So I have these settings here and 9 other files. So these are the 10 changes in total. So let's look at some changes here. You see that the comma was placed before. Here it's configured with a space before. You can change that if you don't like that. But here is also an interesting case of a change where you see it's not that straightforward to do that change, because here we have a comment, and just placing the comment nicely would mean that I have to move this usage ID here in between, and that's actually more than just code formatting. So I can commit this change and do a use leading commas, yeah, and commit that stuff. Oh, it's right. That's not a good idea. I have to put them first in the staging area. Let's try that again. These 10 files. And when I go to this side here, I should see at some point some output. You see it takes a bit longer because behind the scenes, there were some formatting takes place of these 9 files in the staging area. Okay. I see also here the file with the JSON file, which was used to format the stuff. So I could use, for example, do a cut and look at this content and you see what has been passed. So let's undo this change because as you know, I don't like leading commas. So I can go to the area here and go back to that one and say reset to this commit and do a hard reset. So this looks good again. And I have some how many time I have? Yeah, a little bit. I'd like to show you something else. And for that, I want to show you what happens if I have, in fact, no changes. Let's do some dummy changes here. I add here a new line. I add here a lot of new lines. I add there some spaces and here also some spaces, something like that. It's not very intelligent, but the idea is that these changes should be all reverted to the state we have already committed. So I expect here no change when I do a commit. So let's try that. So these 4 files are formatted, and in fact, I get an error. It exited with an error, and I have the possibility to look at the log I showed you before, but this command is also quite nice. It just shows you the command which has been executed. You see 4 files have been formatted, and then each of these files have been removed from the staging area. In the end, no files were left. And that's the reason for the abort. Okay, let's do a final change here where I say, okay, I do really a change here and say order by is probably interesting. Order by cell disk. Something like that. And here some dummy changes. It should be reverted. And here are dummy changes in this file. So, and when I going to add that to the staging area, I expect only that this file will survive, will be formatted first, and then committed. And all these other changes should result in the same file we already have committed and therefore should not be committed. So let's try that. They are already staged. And the only change I expect is add order by those. And I do a commit here. You see, this commit operation takes a bit longer because it called the formatter behind the scene, but it is quite fast in the end, really. I see here the information when I go back to the log that 4 files have been formatted. Test 2, 3, and 4 have been removed from the staging area, but there was something left in the end, and therefore it was committed. I can see that also in the commit history here, and I see that this change has been committed and the stuff here was formatted. So that was the demo of the better pre-commit hook, and that was brings me to the conclusions, to the core messages, or basically to the core message itself, that the formatting code via Git pre-commit hook works. Go to this this website here, and you see an example you can apply to your Git repo, but you just have to be aware it's really not possible to enforce formatting rules. You first have to agree, and every developer has to agree that they install it in their local repo, and then it can help you to automate this this formatting task. You don't have to think always, I have to press Control F7 in SQL Developer. You have a way where you can share your settings in a reliable way. And eventually, all files will be formatted. Either one of the developers will touch it, then it will be formatted, or you have seen if you do partial commits, the last commit will format the file as well. So this was a bit longer than expected, but I hope it helps you and encourages you to try out the pre-commit hook in maybe newer repositories. It might be a bit of a surprise of the result of a formatting change when you do that for large repositories with several thousands of scripts. But for newer repositories, I think it's mature enough to try it out, or better to use it. So I'm ready to take your questions if there are questions. I don't see any questions in the Q&A. Oh, there's something in the chat.
We have Klaus. He raised the hand. Maybe
I'm
Klaus
sorry.
can ask a question if it's still available. You see one attendee raised the hand. Klaus, I unmuted you. Can you try to speak?
I don't see any questions in the Q&A. And
yes, but I see that Klaus is trying to ask. He raised the hand.
Oh, Klaus, I'll raise the hand.
Yes.
Okay, so can you unmute Klaus, or? Or can you try that here? Klaus. I ask him to unmute, or just type in a question, Klaus.
Sven doesn't answer. So anyway, thank you for being with us, and hope to see you in person somewhere in a conference.
Yes, I hope to. I think it would be much easier to ask questions also in between the sessions. I very much like, and of course, I'd like to the other stuff you do when you go presenting on cities you never were. You see a lot of nice nice new impressions of nice countries. So yes, I hope you will accept my papers again when we are able to have sessions in real life. Yeah. Thanks everybody for joining me, and if you have questions, reach out to whatever channel you find me, and thanks.